Hey, welcome to Safety Net. You know, this is turning out to be one of my favorite shows. Last month, Mike Thompson had the opportunity to talk about motorcycle safety, and before that we had Sheriff Keith Woods, we had Lieutenant Barry Call, and the whole thing surrounds the enforcement of certain kinds of things that we should not be doing. And this month, we're going to be talking about some of the drug agencies, the different agencies that help to keep us safe. So stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to Safety Net. This week, Scott Borden. Scott Borden is the University of Rio Grande Community College Campus Police Chief, and he's going to be talking, and I get to ask some questions about some of the different agencies that are involved with keeping us safe. We hear many of the different federal and state agencies, and we see on TV some of the different programs. Well, which one of these agencies are responsible for what? So, Scott, it is a pleasure to be able to sit beside you and we talk about some of the agencies that are involved.
Well, thanks for having me as always.
Well, been my experience that there are an alphabet soup of different agencies, and perhaps you can give us sort of an overview of what some of those agencies do.
Well, obviously you watch the news, there's just so many things that go on anymore. The domestic terrorism, the international terrorism, the drug crisis that's going on, the regular crime, and people hear DA, ATF, DOG, FBI, they hear all that stuff on the news, and you know the alphabet thing is it, but what do those stand for, and what do they actually do, and how do they cooperate with people like us, the sheriff's office, the village police, Gallipolis police, and there's just so much going on. It takes a great deal of cooperation from all of these different agencies to keep us all safe.
Well, I know that some of the agencies happened or were created after or right around 9/11, and then some of the agencies they've been around for many years. And I know that you brought some slides. One of the slides looks at Drug Enforcement Administration.
It's often you'll hear something on TV or see a show, and you'll hear the words DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and basically that's a federal drug enforcement police force, and what they do is they go after the big cartels, the really big drug businesses within the United States and cities and places. So they sort of oversee all the federal things. They're great with local agencies. What they'll do is if a local agency gets into something that's a little bit bigger than what they can handle, like a very huge amount of narcotics and money and stuff, they'll come in and assist with it. But basically, when you hear the word DEA, you're talking about just the big federal drug thing. And they can actually go out of country also, but they're just basically oversee the whole drug enforcement for the United States. And
I saw where it was established in 1973 under President Richard Nixon.
Well, and that's probably when the big drug crisis actually started. I was a trooper. I started in 1981, and when I was a trooper, there was a lot of marijuana. Cocaine was really big. It was the big thing.
Psychedelic,
PCP a little bit. Heroin was one of the most expensive drugs that you could get. It was, nobody could afford it. Now, heroin for $5 you can get a needle, and it's just sort of flip-flopped a little bit, but
Well, Scott, it's my understanding that heroin is made from different things that are out of the United States, and that they are smuggled in. And so,
well, a lot of that, cocaine is made from the coca leaves that come from different countries, and it's smuggled in. The problem is it adapts. They get the materials in here, and then the I hate to say American ingenuity, but they've adapted to the black tar heroin, and it's just it's so complicated now. And then you throw in the prescription pills. It's just DA's got their hands full. So without them, it would just be where some people may feel like it's out of control now. It just would be completely out of control without them.
And I know that they go out of the country to look at some of the smugglers. They are very actively involved in helping to shut down some of the cartels.
Well, yeah, and that's what the hope is they get those people before they put them out of business, so that they can't ship their product to the United States. And like I said, if you sit around and you think, oh, it's just so terrible right now, if you can just imagine what it would be without them, if how many of those cartels were not shut down, how many of those drugs that they get before they come into the country get here, the big city gangs, the MS-13, all of them, that they put a hurting on as much as they can.
That's interesting. I always thought that the next agency, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Now, tobacco is not considered illegal substance.
I think part of their mission is like when people sell cigarettes and alcohol illegally. I don't know that specifically that's got anything to do with the taxes, but I think
I think it does.
It probably that they enforce that. The alcohol that when people have stills, or they have alcohol that's not distilled, that that it's not healthy. So they get involved in a lot of that. Their firearms, obviously, illegal firearms, like sawed-off shotguns and the type of weapons that are banned. They enforce that. Sort of much like DEA, a lot of the gangs and people that try to bring those weapons into the country, they prevent those from coming in. You see them a lot at a lot of these, like Las Vegas shooting, the school shootings. You see them come in and try to assist on those things. They get involved a lot of the bombing things going on. If you remember a couple of years ago, there was a guy that set some backpacks in downtown New York and blew up. They investigate that. Atlanta here, I think the guy that was sending all those bombs to the house mailboxes and to the UPS stations and stuff like that, they were the big investigators on those. So
directly, they're not really going after the illicit drugs, but they're going after those things that create problems with the drug.
Yeah, and that's a good way of putting it. I mean, these gangs, to use MS-13 for example, because they've been on the news a lot, is, they have heavy weaponry, to protect their assets, their money, and a lot of times, those are illegal weapons because they shouldn't be on the street, and ATF is the one that comes in and hits those people, because if you take away their weapons and their protection, the hope is when you disintegrate their organization,
That's
you try to take away their product.
And is ATF here in our area, or only when they're needed?
There's probably an office in each state, sort of like the FBI in cities, Cincinnati, Columbus, like that. Typically, they're called in. They don't force their way in. Most places will call them because they don't have the resources to, if you got explosives.
I see.
They don't have the resources to investigate that, so people beg for them to come in. If we ever had an incident, which I hope we never do, obviously, I would call them and ask them to come in, and typically I don't, they're very cooperative.
And I know that you are very actively involved with training of, let's say you have have 7 full-time individuals, including yourself, and then 2 or 3, depending upon the part-time individuals. And I know that you're involved in an active shooting training program on a yearly basis or sooner, but you also co-train with some of these agencies too, don't you?
Yes, if you remember when we did the some of the active shooters, we had Gay County Sheriff's Office or deputies came in, the village police officers had 14 or 15 local state troopers, because unfortunately if something happens here, those are the people that are going to, I got my officers and there's a couple of us here, but if you have an incident, you just have all kind of issues. People pouring in here that shouldn't be here, people pouring out that you need to stay, the crime scenes, there's all kind of medical issues.
You make a really good point, because on TV, when we see some of the DEAs or some of the ATF, we think they're in every county and that they have such a wide range. But really, when it comes right down to it, they're sort of your support and your backup.
That's the right word, support. My time on the highway patrol, the FBI, DEA, ATF, all of them they're just great. When you call them, they're right there. A lot of these, unfortunate school shootings and things like that, the local sheriff and police chiefs don't normally even have to call them. They will call and say, "Hey, do you need us?" So
I think that's really good. And they're sort of under an umbrella called the Department of Justice, or is that another separate agency?
The FBI is under the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is basically the Attorney General is the leader of the Department of Justice, and you hear the word U.S. attorneys, and what U.S. attorneys do is they prosecute federal crimes. If you get a federal gun violation or a federal drug violation or some type of federal fraud, the U.S. attorneys are the one, through the Attorney General's office, are the ones that prosecute that. They also prosecute federal hate crimes. So every once in a while you see on TV where there's an incident that people feel that there was some type of hate involved, whether based on a religion or minority. The Department of Justice is the ones that investigate that, and they make a determination whether the federal hate crime laws were violated.
Wow. It's also rather interesting. Wanda received some, my wife received some reports. She's always interested in, as an educator, some of the social conditions that some of the kids are involved with. And I guess in Ohio, like all states, there's around 4, 5, 6 different hate groups that have been identified by different organizations. And you would think that they're very difficult to see. And it's amazing to me that we have a number of different hate groups that are existing.
Well, that's, obviously one is too many. And like you said, 4, 5, or 6. Those people don't normally, they stay hidden.
Yeah.
Now, there are times like the Klan will have rallies. They'll get permits and have rallies, and they become visible. But typically, most of them don't really want to be out and seen. They do their hate,
and you're speaking about the Ku Klux Klan, the Klan
meetings. The Ku Klux Klan. I mean, they'll do public things. Most of the other groups, there's other ones. I mean, there's far too many hate groups.
Yeah, there's. I think another one is where it's. I'm not using the right terms, but they're homophobic groups.
Yeah, there's those, the neo-Nazis, the anti-Semitic groups, and things like that. I mean, they.
See, I would have thought we would have been out of that.
Yeah, I should have been way past that. But, I mean, there's incidents that occur in cities, and you'll see it on TV every once in a while that this group was there and stuff. But, and that's what DOJ does a lot, is that they infiltrate those groups and the FBI and try to put them out of business.
Well, Mike, you have a slide the Department of Justice, the one prior to that, if we could. There are some of the different agencies that the Department of Justice is involved with: the FBI, the ATF, the United States Marshals, Drug Enforcement, Federal Bureau. So it's just amazing how many different entities are focused on specific acts of criminal
Well, and
injustice.
most of those agencies that were listed there are the ones that investigate the federal crimes, because that's a whole different, we're talking about different agencies. You've
Yeah.
got federal crimes with federal statutes. You have, state statutes that, local prosecutors will investigate and take over. But that list you had there do mostly the federal things. And
Well, and Mike was showing about Homeland Security, right after 9/11?
yeah, they were born out of that.
And what they were hoping to do is to be a melting pot to where there was complete communications involved with the different agencies. And everyone's proud to be in their specific agency. If I were an FBI person, I'd be very proud. But sharing that information, that contacts, and what Homeland Security, I guess, was supposed to do is to sort of bring everyone together and have a much more organized direction.
And that's a very good way of putting it. Because I think the 9/11 report, what they sort of came up with is a lot of people had minor details and things going on with some of those terrorists on 9/11, and that's people had information and it all wasn't shared. I mean, people had bits.
Yeah.
And the theory behind Homeland Security is they've got one agency that brings everything in, and when they put enough clues together, they know something's going on.
And the interesting thing is each one had their own separate computer system. And, it would be like University of Rio Grande having one computer, State Highway Patrol having another. And there was a problem with the fact that it wouldn't communicate together.
Well, it's an interesting fact I found out before I left the patrol is 11 of the 13 hijackers on 9/11 were stopped at least once, 1 to 3 times within a month before the hijackings, and giving speeding tickets by state troopers.
Wow.
As they were going back and forth for now, obviously, there's no way they could have put, you stop somebody for speed, they're going to go take an airplane into but that's one of the things they found out later through sharing of information, that these guys were actually getting stopped on their way for their practice runs.
One of my favorite agencies is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it's because of TV shows that we've seen, and the FBI has always been put into a positive light, irregardless of some of the concerns, the political scenes, etc. I've always had a favorable opinion of them because of the things that I've seen.
Well, in my personal experience in dealing with them as a commander in the patrol is that they've always been great. They do anything that you ask them. They investigate threats to national security. They do civil rights violations. A lot of people don't realize that. If a police officer, a lot of these things that you see on TV, if a police officer is accused of violating someone's civil rights, the FBI is the one. Excessive force, they're the agency that investigates that. They're the lead on all bank robberies. If you kidnap somebody and you take them across state lines, that becomes FBI territory.
And it's interesting with almost all banks that are FDIC, they are considered federal banks, or I'm using bad terminology, because of that designation. If you rob a bank, FBI probably will be there.
Oh, absolutely. They respond to all. They're the #1 lead on all bank robberies, and just that name FBI strikes fear in criminals. That some of them think, well, local police can't get me, local people can't get me, even state agencies can't get me. But you say the FBI's after me, and
well, what do they say? 97% of bank robberies are resolved within 6 months. 97%.
Well, the problem is they don't quit. You know,
Yeah.
if you rob a bank and you get away with it, the problem is you get away with it and you do it again, and at some point you're going to get caught.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that their scientific labs are just phenomenal.
Oh, it's phenomenal. The thing I saw that's sort of interesting on, I don't know if you ever saw this, so it's one of those things that goes around on Facebook, but with all of the technology is whenever you see a bank robbery picture, it's always really grainy. You can't make out the face.
Yeah.
But when you get on a roller coaster and they take your picture on the roller coaster and you're going 110 miles an hour,
so
it's
why
crystal
is that?
clear. I don't know that anybody's ever fixed that, but I've never seen a bank robbery picture that was clear.
Huh.
It's always, but the technology anymore, and there's just,
Yeah.
the FBI has so many resources. I mean, they've got informants all over the place. They can offer rewards. I mean, most criminals will sell each other out for $5. So, you know, when you
Who wants to go to jail for 20 years?
yeah, 20 years, and
Yeah.
if they're looking at time themselves and they know somebody robbed a bank and they get pinched on something, they'll give somebody up. So they've got a lot of resources.
The other agency, and I'm glad that you brought this, is the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. And I'll be quite frank with you, many of the books that I read, the fiction books, are characters from CIA. And they have a positive aspect of things that they do.
They do, and the thing about them is probably 99% of what they do nobody knows, and you never hear about it.
Except in books.
Except in books, and you know they've been important forever, and you know even in my 33 years, it's not an agency that luckily I ever had to deal with that I know of. But it's just, I mean, they're just one of those part of the puzzle that if they weren't there, you got to think how dangerous things are now is how much worse would it be without them.
Well, it's my understanding that they are outside of the United States, and it's only very, very infrequent that they're ever involved, and it has to do with whatever is happening outside. So they keep us safe from some of the situations. You know, we live in a world that can be dangerous in certain areas.
And you know, and a lot of these agencies, especially, you know, the Homeland Security and the FBI and CIA, is to, you know, and a lot of what's going on militarily is to keep those people from coming here.
Yeah.
And, you know, if they can't get here, they can't do anything, and that's what the hope is.
You know, another favorite agency, and I'll be quite frank with you, when I graduated, I had sent a letter asking, and that was the Secret Service, and I thought that would be neat. You know, you get out of college and then you immediately protect the president. And then after I started finding out that there's a lot more to the Secret Service. They
travel a lot.
Yes, they do.
They're impressive people. I mean, I was fortunate when I was on the patrol. I was part of a detail with President Bush when he came to Portsmouth, and my last year or so, I got to be on the protection detail for candidate future President Obama, and Sarah Palin, John McCain, and Joe Biden. So I actually even had a thing with Al Gore when he was vice president, had a protection thing in Portsmouth. So I got to deal with a lot of Secret Service people, and they are extremely impressive people.
Yes, yes. Well, I would have probably gone into the counterfeit. You know, you just don't immediately go to work with the president and things.
Yeah,
of that
there's
nature,
several levels.
There's several levels.
Well, a lot of people don't even realize that's one of their main functions is counterfeit.
Yes.
And
yes.
You just really think they protect the president, but they're born out of the Treasury Department. So.
And then we have the National Security Agency, and they tend to be, in some of the books that I read, the bad guys.
Well, they're sort of an offshoot of CIA, I think. And where CIA is sort of hands-on, I think the National Security Agency, that everybody calls NSA, has, I mean, a lot of theirs is cyber warfare against terrorists and criminals. They monitor.
They do a very important part. Yes.
They monitor emails, text, phone calls. trying to, break codes and I mean, go back to what we said before. Without them, how bad would it be?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then we have the immigration and custom enforcement. We've been hearing a lot of that on the news, the ICE. And, that's something that maybe in the future, since we're running out of time, that we can talk a little bit more as to what they are responsible for, because we hear a lot of bad press. Depending upon what political aisle you are on, depends upon how good or how bad they are. But they do keep our borders safe.
They
or
do.
They
And
do the best.
And they're very professional.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very professional people.
And then, like for you to talk a little bit about the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification, and maybe we can have a guest come on that can talk more about what kinds of things that they're involved with.
BCI is what you hear, and every state has it. It's sort of like a state law enforcement. It's not, separate from the state highway patrol, but they've got investigators. They've got lab, because there's 2 labs in the country or in the state. It's the state highway patrol has a lab where you send drugs and things like that too. The BCI has a big lab. If you have a sexual assault and things like that. They get involved in a lot of smaller agencies like us. If we had something really serious, we would ask them to come in. We have a couple times. The village has a couple times. Some sheriff's departments. If you don't have the manpower, they're involved in the 8 persons that were murdered in Pike County a couple years ago. Or last year. They were doing a lead in that. So.
Well, that for a future show, I'd like to see if we can have a guest on that can talk more in specific. Scott, we're talking with Scott Borden. Scott Borden is the University of Rio Grande Community College campus police chief, and he's had a lot of experience involved with law enforcement, but primarily in keeping us safe. And I'm Patrick Dengel. I want to thank all the listening audience for viewing in, and until next month, we're Safety Net.
Yes, sir.